Hi, I'm here with Zachary Renstrom. Zachary, you're running for Washington County Commission, Seat A, against Chris White, the Democratic candidate, and you're running on the Republican ticket. Today we're going to talk about the Lake Powell pipeline and kind of narrow our focus on that. So before we start that, Zachary, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your background and you know, what qualifies you for the County Commission and why are you running?
Sure. Excuse me. So I guess a little bit about my background. I feel I have some good qualifications there. Is I'm actually a licensed civil engineer, and for civil engineers we deal with pipelines all the time. We deal with roads, bridges, a lot of engineering projects that are kind of focused outside. But then also I'm actually a licensed patent attorney, and so I've studied the law. I understand the law. I work with a lot of new companies that are doing research and development. And so what I'm trying to do, one of the reasons why I ran for county commissioner is you kind of mentioned that there's some big issues facing the county. And I think it's essential that we have leaders that understand all the ramifications from that. And so, with the Lake Powell pipeline, there's already a lot of studies produced. And it's interesting, I've talked to some people about those studies and they're like, yeah, I can't understand it. Well, to me, I can dissect those, I can point out flaws, because not only do I read the study, but I actually go to the data and can analyze the data too. And so I'm hoping to bring these unique skill set to the county commissioner to help the county.
So, I guess with the Lake Powell pipeline, the way I'm kind of looking at it and kind of structuring my questions is that it seems like that there's three, I guess, general issues that are related, but in a way they're sort of separate issues. So I guess one would be the cost of, and that's I think what mostly gets discussed is what the cost is. But also I think that there's a question that people are asking is do we need the water? Is there another way of getting that water that's maybe not as costly? Or is the water going to be there would be I think kind of the third thing people bring up, whether or not there will be water. So I guess to start with, as far as the cost goes, the Water Conservancy is saying 900 million, I'm sorry, to just shy of $1 billion. Some of the other figures we've heard, from other candidates in groups like Citizens for Dixie Futures, they estimate that it could cost, 3 times, 5 times, or maybe even $9 billion. They say, looking at other projects that they think might be comparable. What do you think about, have you looked at some of the figures, some of the claims by the various sides, and do you have do you feel like you have a grasp on what it might cost?
I do, because when we're talking about these, we're talking about engineers' costs, and I put those together a lot. So I guess what the first part is, we're still in the preliminary phase of it. Like we haven't even tied down the route that we're going to take, and that's going to be a huge difference. If we have to take one route, it could be substantially more money than the other. The other thing when we come to engineers' cost estimate is, we as an engineer, we go out and we make our best guess of what it's going to be. Now, for the Lake Powell pipeline, I can tell you the two costs that will be the most important is the cost of steel and the cost of gasoline. If it's bid during a time when those two items are low, then the pipeline will come in at a low bid. But if all of a sudden steel spikes or gas spikes, it's going to be a lot of money. A good example of that is the Mall Drive Bridge. The engineers were estimating that at, I think it was around $14 million, and the bids came in at $9 million. The reason why is certain aspects of construction costs have gone down, like gasoline's cheaper right now, which in turn makes concrete powder cheaper, and we have other things. And so that's the big thing that I like to emphasize is right now we don't know the true cost. We have some estimates, but I think it's really important that we continue down and tie in the final line and tie in the final design, because at that point then we can really go out and say, okay, we're ready to bid. We're willing to sign contracts to say this is going to be installed. And I think that's what is important to consider about costs, because those estimates will change. I'll promise you.
Right. I guess do you have any, depending on where that cost ends up being, I guess when some of these things get nailed down, like the route and some of the logistic problems that they're going to have to overcome, or obstacles rather. How much, I guess, is Washington County is reasonable to pay, I guess, for a pipeline to bring water to well? Is there an upper limit to where it's like, we don't need the water that much?
Right.
And how do you determine that?
So that's an excellent question, and it's going to be a question that has to be answered. And so with every big project, like the Mall Drive Bridge, I'll use, you know, that money didn't come from one person or one entity. St. George City put in some, UDOT put in some, the MPO put in some, and so there's a combination of that, and that happens on most large engineering projects. Rarely does one entity just come in and pay for it. So with the Lake Powell pipeline, the counties, the citizens of Washington County, you know, that's going to be spread out over, like the state of Utah, and I also bring this up with a lot of the people I meet. You know, the Utah State Legislature is going to have a huge role in this whole pipeline. And there's probably going to have to be legislation there that talks about how we're going to do this. The Utah State Division of Drinking Water Rights, or excuse me, the Utah State Division of Drinking Water, you know, their board is going to play a huge part in it, because here in Washington County, we just don't have the ability to go get $1 billion. We're not going to raise taxes $1 billion. But if the state's going to help out, and you know, we do all these projections, that's how it comes up. One thing that I will say that I feel very strongly about is I think that the Lake Powell pipeline should be paid for, the majority of that should be based upon the new people coming in. So the new homes, there's the impact fee, and that's where a lot of that money should come from.
Why is that?
Well, I think that's why we're building it, first of all, is for them. I mean, we're saying, okay, we're building this pipeline so you can build your home in the future. And so I think that's a fair transfer.
Does that, do you feel like that sets up any sort of, I don't want to say catch-22, but at least maybe a difficult situation where you need the water to have the growth, but you need the growth to pay for the pipeline kind of deal, you know what I mean? What are your thoughts on that?
So, when they go out and you know, finance this project, everybody's going to be looking at, and they're going to look at the rate of growth and how much money they expect on the rate of growth. And then they're going to come in, they're going to do all this analysis. There's going to be lots of accountants looking at that, because the state of Utah, you know, their accountants will be looking at that to make sure that we'll be falling within that range. We do know a couple of things about St. George or Washington County, is people love this area, and they're going to continue to move here because it's such an awesome place to live. And so I don't think we have to worry about people not wanting to come here. So it's just more of the question is the rate of growth.
Okay. Now the other thing that, as we talked about, that gets raised, the other question that gets raised is, do we need the pipeline? You know, Paul Van Dam, for instance, has said that, you know, there's existing sources of water that can be exploited, and through mixture of, I think he said, conservation and exploiting some of these other local resources. He believes that we can, you know, I think he said 500 or 600,000 people we could, you know, support a population. What do you think about figures, claims like that? Have you looked into anything like that? And what are your feelings about alternative sources?
So that's kind of a compound question. So.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. And feel free to unpack it anyway. Like.
Okay, so let's talk about conservation. There's no question that conservation has to be a huge part of this. Even if the Lake Powell pipeline is built, we have to conserve water here. And you know, today we've done a little bit, but we have not seen true conservation here in Washington County. You know, some areas they have ordinance that say that you can't have lawn in your front yard. And we haven't wanted to, as a community, we haven't wanted to take that approach yet, but we may have to at a certain point. And there's things that we can do. Right now, in the last couple of years, we've actually been conserving water pretty well. We've actually met the governor's goals for conservation of water. And, you know, the goal is to exceed the new goals, basically. And so we have been conserving water, but we can do better. I mean, I'm sure you've seen water going down the curb from somebody's sprinkler spraying into the street.
Right.
So definitely, no doubt about conservation. When we get to sources, that's a much trickier question, and there are a couple sources we can develop. You know, and I've looked at those as engineers, but some of the numbers that I've seen, and I'm not speaking for Paul Van Dam, but other people have come to me. Is, you know, one person came to me and says, well, there's tons of water out underneath Washington Fields. We'll just put some wells there, and we'll have to put all that. The problem is that water is brackish, meaning you can't drink it. And the only way to treat that water is through a reverse osmosis process. That's extremely expensive. We're talking large sums of money. Then the other part with that is it has a huge environmental consequences, in the sense that after the water goes through the reverse osmosis process, you know, it takes 90% of the water out, but the last 10% of the remaining water, it's almost toxic at that point. And now if you're by an ocean, it's not as big a deal because they can, you know, put that salt out into the ocean. But it's a huge environmental issue that you just can't do. So for the most part, reverse osmosis has not worked unless you're by the coast, and we're not. So a lot of these sources, people come to me and say, oh yeah, we have plenty of water. I'm like, well, that water's not good. Another good example is Sportsman's Warehouse. I was the project engineer on that. And when we were digging that, doing the excavation, we hit a spring. And that water was crystal clear. It was really cool and like cold to the touch. And it was interesting sitting there looking at all this water seeping out of the rock. One construction guy came up and he was thirsty, so he slurped up, get some water in his hand, and he started drinking it. And he started gagging and spitting and dry heaving because the water was so nasty that he couldn't drink. Well, he did drink a little bit and then it came back up.
Right.
But that's water that a lot of people would say, hey, there's water right there, but it's not. You have to get drinking water here. And so, is there some additional sources? There are, and we're currently developing those. Can we do conservation? We can. I don't think that the numbers that have been thrown around by certain groups, I don't think we can get there without radically changing everything. I mean, right now when I look out St. George, when I'm up on the Dixie Rock and I look out and I see all those beautiful green trees, what they're envisioning is all those green trees gone. And we'll turn into more of a concrete jungle. I don't think necessarily we want to go to that extreme. But to get to that extreme level of conservation, that's what we would have to do. And something I don't want to live here if this was this way. I really enjoy the trees. So.
So the trees are a good point. So I guess what you're saying is that with the water conservation that we wouldn't be able to have trees. I guess with the level of water conservation that we would need. I mean, just because I've been talking a bit with like Ron Thompson, about because they're building this new park, and a bit with the city of St. George about their ground cover ordinance, and so one of the things I'm hearing is that actually trees, they say, are one of the best ways. Because as opposed to like front lawns, which are very, very thirsty, that trees actually use very little water, but they cover the ground and keep it cool and that sort of thing. So, I don't know. I guess have you looked into things like desert scaping and that sort of thing? Because my understanding of desert scaping is that they use trees, but maybe different types of trees than we're used to. Maybe more, I guess, native to this area type trees that use less water.
So you actually bring a good point up, and that's what I was talking about conservation, about which level do we want to draw it at.
Okay.
I think, probably getting rid of a lot of the lawn that's out there right now that's just not being used by a lot of people, that's kind of easy. Changing a couple of shower heads here and there, that's easy. And we should still continue to do that, don't get me wrong, and encouraging xeriscape and all this other stuff. But to get to the point where you're saying, okay, we're going to still achieve all this growth that we're going to achieve without the Lake Powell pipeline, the only way to get to that point is to go to extreme measures. And a big cottonwood tree uses a lot of water. I mean, it uses less water than lawn, but it still uses a lot. We can go to like mesquite trees and a few other things like that. We can start coming down, but we lose all those big, beautiful cottonwood trees in town if we got to that point.
Okay.
So it's a balance. So conservation, absolutely, we can get to a certain point. But to make up for the loss of the Lake Powell pipeline is such a high level, we turn into a concrete jungle.
Okay, I get what you're saying now. It's about degree, you're saying, and which level do we want to go to? Okay, okay.
Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think I misunderstood. So my fault. So I guess then the third question that comes up is, will the water be there? Some people are worried that because states like California have prior water rights, that if the drought in the West continues or worsens, that it may get to the point where the amount of water that we're allowed to have is minimal or non-existent in some years because of just the kind of legalities as to who gets first dibs, I guess, at that water.
Right. No, and I think that's a fair question again to ask. So when we look at the water rights, right now Utah is not utilizing a substantial. Well, I don't want to use the word substantial because that's kind of a definition. Sure. But there's water rights that Utah is not using. So with the Colorado River, we know that it was over-allocated. There's no question about that. All the engineers agree with that. And so there's going to be a reduction there. So California, it's going to be very painful for them because the last time we had a reduction on the Colorado River, they just came across and said, okay, everybody's going to take a percentage cut right across the board. I think that was the fairest way to do it. California, they said, sure, we'll take it. They really haven't, because they've been using a lot more water than they're supposed to. I think we'll have the same, we'll probably come back and say, okay, we're going to have another production cut at a certain point, so all the states are going to be lowered. But Utah's in a really good position, because even if it's still lowered, then we're not using all our water still allocated at that point, so the Lake Powell pipeline should be fine. That's including using the Lake Powell pipeline. So they came across and say, hey, we're going to take a 10% cut with all the states. Utah, it's Utah, Colorado, and I think it's Wyoming, and we're doing pretty good. The tough thing is, like, Nevada will be in a lot of trouble, and California will be in huge problems too. So those will be the states most affected. So right now, I feel that we have the water rights there. If they do the same thing where they cut everybody by, the same percentage point, we'd still be okay. And so I feel it's pretty good. Now I say that, but I feel that still the Colorado Compact, we need to revisit that with all the states. Now as a county commissioner, I won't be able to do a lot with that. Right. It's more at governor level, but it's something that I would want to strongly encourage the governor's office. And they are doing it, in all fairness to them, that, hey, we need to really look at this and address this issue. So.
It sounds like that it would depend upon, I guess, how, and this is kind of what I think some of the other candidates said too, which is that there is a bit of uncertainty in the sense of we don't know how it will be determined if something like that were to happen. And that's if, I mean, it could be the opposite, that we could get lots of rain and then everything is fine. But is there, I mean, would you like to see some more certainty there before going forward with a decision to invest that kind of money? Like, maybe something, maybe something worked out with that Colorado Pact, or to where there's a more, I guess, a clear line as to what would happen in the instance of a shortage.
Right. So here's a couple of things with this shortage, and a lot of people actually ask me about global warming and how that's going to affect it. So our local conditions here, one of the things that scares me is that if we have a couple of really bad years, we're in a lot of trouble here. This last year was really bad until we got some rain towards the fall. But we have accounts documented that, hey, this area's faced some pretty serious rainfalls. And we really only have the Virgin River, and so we could dry up here pretty quick. And so to me, when people start coming to me with concerns about water, I'd say, hey, it would be excellent to have another water source. We have very good historical data on the Colorado River that says, that thing's flowed for a long time now. It's been reduced at certain points during certain droughts. I guess, and so having a second water source would make me feel more secure at night, thinking, even if we did have a regional drought, worse than the one we're having this now, boy, it'd be nice to have a line into that river system. But the other thing that concerns me, though, and I brought this up at a debate the other day, is I think they're going to make some adjustments on the river. And one of the things that they might come to Utah and say, hey, Utah, you're not using all this water, so we're just, it's not going to get it. I could see them doing that. And it happens a lot, possession's 9/10 of the law is kind of a statement we use a lot of time. So I think if we don't build the Lake Powell pipeline right now, we're not going to have that chance again. I think it'll be gone. And in the discussion that we're having right now, we talked about cost, and that's a huge issue, because I will even concede at a certain point we can't afford it. Right. I mean, it happens a lot as engineers where I'm like, I have all these engineering projects that I think would be great and awesome, but you just can't afford it, and so you have to go without. So when we're talking about the cost of the Lake Powell pipeline, I think part of this discussion we have to say is like, in 20, 30 years, that option probably won't be there. Right. But if we're pulling water out of the Lake Powell, or using that water, I think it would be very, very hard for them to come and say, okay, we're going to shut you off now. I think it would be much easier for California to come and say, hey, you're not using that water, we're going to cut you off at the knees where you're not using that. And so I think we should consider that and say, but I think if the Lake Powell pipeline's built and we're pulling water out of it, I think there's a minuscule chance that that pipeline would be shut off. So
it would be a very politically difficult thing to do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we said there were 3 issues, but I think that there's kind of an underlining underlying fourth issue of growth, just
Yeah.
just I guess the vision of growth in Washington County or in the Virgin River Valley. You know, sometimes when I hear numbers like when Paul says that, oh, we could support up to 500 or 600,000 people here, what catches my attention is, wait, 500 or 600,000 people here?
Yeah.
You know, and is that, you know, is that kind of where you think where we're heading? Or, I mean, what do you think about growth? How big do you think Washington County should get or could get, or is there an upper limit to how many people could live here?
You know, there is going to be a certain point where we just reach an upper limit. There's only so much resources to go around. But as I've talked to other people about growth, you know, we have to put a face on growth. And the face that I put on growth is I've got 3 young kids. And, you know, I really hope in about 20 years there'll be 3 more building permits issued.
Right.
And, you know, when I talk to other people about them wanting their families to live here, they say, yeah, I hope my kids live right here. So when we talk about growth, we're talking about our kids and future generations here. I'm very grateful that several years ago that other leaders of the community came in and said, we're going to build, you know, a pipeline up to Pine Valley Mountain. We're going to build, you know, some reservoirs and dams, because that infrastructure made it possible for me to be able to make the decision to move back here. So when we talk about growth, we have to consider that. And then there's just a part of our economy that we have to talk about. You know, during the construction slowdown, when growth essentially stopped here, it was interesting to me how, you know, individuals that were retired, you know, they were fine. They could stay here. But the population that we really lost was there was a lot of families that moved out of the area. They didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay here, but, you know, we didn't have any growth going on, so it stopped. And there's other communities that have made decisions to stop growth, either politically or just because they get to a point where their resources don't support it. And those communities generally really struggle because the youth leave. Right. There's no opportunities for them, so they have to leave. So when we get to a certain point, you know, in 20, 30, or 50 years, and my grandkids come to me, I want to be able to say, you know, we, as my generation, we try to make the reasonable steps to accommodate you kids, essentially, because that's what we're talking about. We will get to a certain point where there's just not anything left. So we're just going to have to look at, that's how I look at growth.
Right.
As I see my kids, I mean, people don't like growth. My grandpa, like I said, doesn't like growth, but then he had 6 kids. And so the only way to stop growth is to stop having kids and to truly close our borders.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when we talk about growth, people think of it in terms of people moving down from up north, or maybe retirees coming from California. But I guess what you're saying is that there's, and it's similar to what Victor said actually, that there's a built-in element of growth in the sense that, you know, we're reproducing, we're all having kids, and if you want those kids to stay, you're saying that there's going to have to be places for them to live, and that we're going to have to expand. You know, I get that, but you know, at a certain point, and it's like you said, you have to cut it off at a certain point. So, I mean, how do you kind of manage the growth, and how do you determine? And should it be the role of a county commissioner or any, I guess, public official to kind of make that call, whether on behalf of the representatives or not? You know, like, we're going to cut it off here. I'm not even sure how you would cut it off, I guess. I mean, what are your thoughts on how do you manage growth?
So, to manage growth, that's a big question. And so some of it's just infrastructure, the way we lay out our community. And that can play a huge role in how our community feels. If we go into a new area that there hasn't been homes, and we go in there and we're like, okay, we're going to construct homes here. If we do it right, you have trails, you have walkable communities, you have a community that feels really good. And I think that's essential. As an engineer, I've had a role in a lot of that. And it's amazing to me how we can go into an area and put homes in there, and it just feels like a gridlock. Or we can go in there and do homes, and we have trails, and we have, you know, ways for people to kind of walk around their community. It just feels like a good community. So there's that part of growth that we have to be worried about and control. But there is a certain point that we just have to say, yeah, we only have so much water, and there's only so much we can do with it. We just have to make sure we're making reasonable steps to accommodate that. So, and you know, even going back to the Lake Powell pipeline and the cost, I think we have to look at that and say, is this reasonable for our community to take on that big of a project? Sometimes we're going to have to say, yeah, it's not reasonable, and other times we're going to have to say, yeah, we're going to have to make some sacrifices, just like our previous generations did by digging a ditch all the way up Pine Valley Mountain. When I look at that, I can't imagine. digging a ditch that far with shovels.
Right.
I mean, that's what they had.
Yeah.
They didn't have a backhoe, so we're just going to have to look at that. But when we talk about growth, there's a huge aspect to it. Just the infrastructure on it, how the layout, how everything feels, open spaces, you know, parks and everything like that. And then there's the part of growth where we talk about just our infinite amount of resources here. And protecting the resources that we have now. I mean, one of the things I love about this area is our clean air. You know, it's interesting in the wintertime how I have family members come from the Wasatch Front down here just for the clean air.
Right.
I think that's something we have to really protect and watch out after, and so we have to manage that. So.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time,
Sure.
Zachary.
Well, thank you for inviting me in.
Absolutely.
So, thanks.
Sure.